Hello everyone and welcome. It's Alexandra. Today we've got to the major stage in the process of creating our antique fashion mini book, and it's the stage of making the cover and the binding. I will mention the main supplies that we're going to use today, and then we will dive right into it. So the three main supplies include chipboard, fabric, and craft cardstock. Other than that, we are going to use our glue. Then we are going to use glue stick for adhering fabric to the chipboard covers. We are going to use our scoreboard, scissors, brads, ruler, craft knife. Then we are going to stamp on the spine of our book, and we are going to use some stamps. In the very beginning of our series, I had a list of some of the stamp sets from Creative Expressions that you could use because the theme fits the theme of the stamp sets. Then for stamping, I'm going to use archival ink. If you have any distress inks, I think that could also work. The next thing that we're going to need might be the needle tool. Then we are going to need a sewing machine because we are going to add stitching on our cover. Using sewing machine is not a must, but I will definitely do that because I like how the stitching adds to the beauty of the finished project. I'm also going to use distress ink because I want to ink around the edges of the cover once I wrap it with fabric. And I think, oh yeah, one more thing. We are also going to use some scrap pieces of cotton, and I also will need two little pieces of twine. And this twine is relatively thick. It's in millimeters, about 2.5 millimeters thick. I will use it for a decorative purpose, and instead of the twine and the colorful fabric scraps, you can use just a piece of ivory lace, for example, or any other color of lace that you think will work good with the colors on the cover of your mini book. I used the colorful fabric scraps for creating the so-called headbands at the top and at the bottom of my book, and here they are. So on this book, for example, on my sample, I used this fabric, so maybe today I will use some green. It will not be that much visible, so the pattern matters less. Maybe only the color is what's important. So in a nutshell, these are the tools and supplies that we're going to work with today. I forgot to tell you what craft cardstock I used. I used to bind mine from Joanne, and it was from the Park Lane brand. Maybe you will be able to find this specific brand at Michael's now. But anyway, even if it's not the same brand, you can see that it is 65-pound paper, and it's relatively thick, not too thin. I think it's actually the same weight as the cream paper that we used for printing our digital pages. I will post the link to the medium weight chipboard that I get from Amazon in the description box down below. The size of my covers, 4 5/8 by 6 5/8. Both of my covers are identical in size, and to figure out the size, you are going to need to measure your base page. Now, when it's all assembled, my base page measures 4 3/8 by 6 3/8, and the covers are 1/4 inch larger than each one of those measurements. So whatever size your base page is, you will add a 1/4 inch to each one of the measurements, and this will be the size of your covers. Now you will also remember this measurement, because when we are going to create the outer spine of our mini book, we will have to cut our cardstock and use this measurement once again. So I want you to pay attention to that. Let's set the covers aside for now and talk about the fabric that we have here. So each one of the covers will be wrapped in cotton or muslin fabric, and I use just some basic ivory color because I will be adding my printed pattern papers on top, and I just didn't think that it was necessary to use any patterned fabric here. Each one of the fabric pieces that we're going to use for wrapping our covers needs to be, as you can see, slightly bigger than the chipboard piece. I'm going to show you how to wrap the chipboard in fabric on the example of one cover, and then the second cover piece you will just have to wrap on your own. Let's begin with one of the pieces. I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to take my glue stick. I will generously cover the chipboard with the glue. Please make sure that you reach the edges of the chipboard piece as well and not only spread the glue in the center. Let's put this piece on top of the fabric, flip it to this side, and spread the fabric on top nicely so that there are no air bubbles under the fabric. Now we can flip it to this side, and we are going to trim the corners. Now when I'm trimming the corners, I will draw a line here with a pencil so that you can see. I will trim at an angle, of course, and I will not trim too close to the corner of the chipboard because I don't want to leave the edges of the chipboard exposed, and I will need some fabric there for covering them nicely. Each one of the 4 corners will have to be cut the same way, just not too close to the corner of the chipboard. Now I'm going to use glue stick and adhere the fabric to the chipboard along the long edges. Use your bone folder and stretch the fabric nicely so that there are no bubbles, no wrinkles, and you have something that looks like this. Then let's do the same on the opposite side. And here is our first piece. I couldn't reach all the way to these corners with the glue stick. That's why I'm going to add there tiny drops of glue and then make sure that I seal these corners by pressing on the fabric with my fingers, pinching the fabric between my fingers, and do the same thing in the remaining 3 corners. You can also use your bone folder for that purpose, but this is how it needs to look like. Next, we need to create a line in the very center of this chipboard piece. And for that, I'm going to use a plain strip of paper. And this paper piece is 6 5/8 inch long. Yours can be different. Fold it in half and use a pencil and draw a line in the very center, right on top of the fold. And then you will put this piece on top of your chipboard cover. And again, use a pencil and create a tick mark on both edges of the paper template, continuing the line that you have in the middle of it. Then you're going to use a ruler and connect two of those tick marks and create a horizontal line on the chipboard piece like so. We're going to repeat the same steps until this point for the second chipboard piece. And here are two of my chipboard pieces ready. I will set them a bit to the side. To connect them, we are going to use a piece of cardstock, and we are also going to use another piece of fabric. My piece measures 5 3/8 by 6 5/8. So let me circle the measurement that might be different for you and me, and that's the measurement that will be taken from the measurements on your covers. 5 3/8 will be the same for both you and me, and this measurement, which is circled, can be different. Now you are going to take your piece of cardstock and put it on top of the scoreboard, with the short side being across the top. That's the side which is 5 3/8 of an inch. You are going to score your piece on the left hand side at 1.5 inch. Rotate it, score at 1.5 inch again. And now between the two previously scored lines, you are going to score at every 1/8 of an inch. Once you will be done, you will see that your cardstock wants to curve this way. So you're going to fold the flaps of the cardstock piece on the sides right up to the very first score line that will be there. And on the opposite side, the same thing. You will create a flap. Double check again that both of them are 1.5 inch wide. We are going to keep on working with this piece now. I need to wrap it with the fabric, and I am going to first of all measure what's the width of the fabric piece that I need. So the space between the flaps, the one which is scored at every 1/8 of an inch, is 2 3/8. I want to cover this whole area with fabric, and I want the fabric to extend further than the score lines on both sides, about 3/4 inch. So I'm going to create some guidelines for myself so that when I apply the glue to the cardstock piece and cover it with fabric after that, I can see where exactly I need to put the fabric on top of the cardstock piece. Now I will just make a snip with the scissors on the fabric, and I will tear the excess off. That's how we need to determine the width of our fabric piece. Now, to determine the length, I'm going to wrap this piece around the future outer spine of the book and see where they start to overlap. I don't want them to overlap, so I will once again create a snip with my scissors and remove the excess fabric. Now my fabric piece is ready to be glued on to the cardstock. I will put a scrap piece of paper under the craft cardstock, and I will use glue stick and apply it to the area of the paper which is from one sketched pencil line to another, I will make sure that I apply enough glue across the edges of the cardstock, both at the top and at the bottom, and also that I stay quite close to the sketched pencil lines on both sides. Now I will just try to center this piece on top and adhere it by pressing right on top of the fabric with my fingers, and then using bone folder for adhering it even better. Make sure that you spread it nicely so that it's all even, that it doesn't have any bubbles. Then we will flip it to the back, and we will have to adhere each one of the fabric pieces on this side. Again, I pay special attention to the area along the outer edge of the cardstock. Here you have to be careful not to pull the fabric too much, because we just need it to wrap nicely around the edges of the paper. And since we applied some glue there, the paper is a bit wet and less sturdy. Let's do the same with the second flap. This is how it looks so far. Now, our cardstock piece is 6 5/8 inch long. We can once again use our previous paper template, which is of the same length, and find the center and create a tick mark based on the template on our craft cardstock piece. I already did that before, but here I'm showing you how to do that. Just make sure that you line the edges of the template with the edges of your cardstock piece. Once you have 2 of those tick marks, just connect them. You don't have to draw the line on the fabric. We just need that line to be visible on the cardstock. The glue is still not dry, but I will try to gently fold the side flaps again. And as you can see, I'm using a ruler just to make sure that I don't fold too much. I want to ink this edge on the outside because this is what will be visible. Then I will do the same with the flap on the opposite side. And now I can also ink along the top and the bottom edges. Next, I'm going to stamp in this section of the outer spine. This is my result. I am going to stitch around the edges of the center of this piece and show you how it turned out. This is how it looks now. A few things. Start to stitch not from the very corner, but somewhere from here, so that when you pull the threads to the back, they're not in the very corner, which will be visible. I tied the threads in a double knot, and I can trim the excess. Now we are going to get back to our covers, and they will be attached on both sides of this outer spine of our book, like so. I'm going to ink the long edges of my cover pieces so that I can see better where to line two of these elements together. Next, I'm going to measure from this edge of the cover 1.5 inches. I will take my outer spine and I will trim the corners from the flaps just a little bit. Make sure that you don't trim all the way to the fold, that you are about maybe 1/2 inch away from the fold or 3/8 inch away from the fold. And let's do that on the opposite side again. Next, I'm going to line this edge of the outer spine with the line that I have on the chipboard piece, and I will also make sure that I match my horizontal lines on both pieces, and that's how I will know that everything is perfectly straight. I will now take my tacky glue and apply it on this side of the flap, quite close to the distressed or inked edge. You can use fabric tack if that was your question, but I think that simple white glue works great for this purpose as well. So once again, I'm lining the edge of the cardstock with the vertical line that I drew, and as I do that, I also look at the horizontal marks. Now I'm going to fold the top flap and the bottom flap and use a pencil to mark up to where I will need to apply the glue. So I'm going to use a bit more of the tacky glue where the fabric and the paper are, close to the spine. And on the remaining area, I'm going to use glue stick. Let's fold our fabric there and adhere it to the chipboard covers, both at the top and at the bottom. Make sure that you form nice looking corners as you do that. Try to sort of pull the fabric up when you're folding the flap at the bottom, and also pull the fabric down when you're folding and gluing the flap at the top. Spread everything evenly with the bone folder. This is how it looks from the front. Now let's do the very same thing and attach the cover to the second flap of our outer spine, and this will be our back cover. This is our cover for now. I'm not bothered by the glue that I can see through the fabric because all of it will be covered by the patterned printed paper. I can now add more ink around the edges that have not been inked before. Let's cut out the pieces for the front and back cover of our book from the printables. Ink them on the edges. Get back to our cover and glue them on top of our covers. Center them while you adhere them to the fabric. Now I am going to stitch around each one of the cover parts, both on the front and on the back. You are going to first of all stitch along this edge and then rotate the piece and stitch along the top, along the side, and along the bottom. Pull your threads in the back, tie them in double knots, and do the same for the second half of your cover. The same thing, you will stitch first of all closer to the edge, which is right next to the spine, and then stitch along the remaining 3 edges. I think I can try and fit the cover into my machine and fold it a little bit while I do that, and stitch around 4 edges at once, and then stitch around the remaining 4 edges again. So I will do that and get back to you. A few things about the stitching. First of all, when you stitch through thick chipboard and paper and fabric, increase the length of your stitch from the default 2.5 millimeters to at least 3 millimeters long. Then, in the places where the sandwich through which you stitch is even thicker, maybe try to turn the hand wheel manually or go at a very low stitching speed. And in general, don't stitch on a high speed when you stitch through chipboard. Now I have pulled the tails of the threads to the back of my cover, tied double knots there, and I'm going to use little pieces of painter's tape and secure the threads somewhere here on the chipboard cover. Trim the excess. This is how our cover looks like. I wanted to add some brads on the front of the cover, and I think now is the good time to do that. I will poke the holes, and I will add one right here. Then I also wanted to poke 3 holes here to mimic the 3 buttons on the coat of this beautiful lady. Rotate the prongs of the brads so that they're not all bunched up and create additional bulk on the cover. If you want to punch a hole and add an eyelet for attaching maybe some dangles or some additional charms to the spine of your book, then that's the time to do that. I'm not going to attach anything to the spine this time, so I will keep working on the binding for our pages. I am first of all going to need another piece of that same craft cardstock, and this piece will measure 6 3/8 by 8.5. Let me circle that 6 3/8 measurement and take the base page and show you that the height of the piece of cardstock that will be used for creating the binding will be the same as the height of your printed and assembled base page. So in my case, it is 6 3/8. In your case, it may be different, but the 8.5-inch measurement will be identical for both of us. We will have to score this piece. How to score it? Let me explain. You will put it on top of your scored board with the 8.5-inch side being at the top, and you will score on the left at 1 1/4 inch. Then you will rotate the piece like so and score at 1 1/4 inch again. Then you will flip your paper piece like so and score between these two score lines at every 3/8 of an inch. Next, you will fold the flaps on the left hand side and on the right hand side up. You will flip your paper to the reverse side and you will add numbers to each one of the 3/8 inch sections that you have created. There will be 16 of them. Take a pencil and add any kind of marks, any that you like, maybe just snowflakes or stars or just lines, to the section numbers 2, 5, 8, 11, and 14. To these sections, we are going to apply the glue when we are going to create hinges for our 5 pages. And as you can see, we have marked 5 sections that will have to be glued together with the sections right next to them. And that way we will have 5 hinges. So section number 2, where you are going to apply the glue, and I will show you how to do that, will have to be glued down together with the section number 3. That means that right now I can create this type of fold between section 2 and 3. When I'm looking at my paper from this side, I'm going to create a valley fold. Valley. It will go in. This fold, for example, is a mountain fold because it looks up. But this fold goes down, so it's a valley fold. Now, between the next 2 sections, 5 and 6, we're also going to create a valley fold. And when you fold the paper, don't rely only on the score lines that you have created. Also, make sure that you look at the edges. They have to be straight. Make sure that they're not offset like that. Even just a little bit of offset can influence the final look of our binding. So we have already 2 valley folds between the section 2 and 3, between the section 5 and 6. Let's repeat these steps and create valley folds between the sections 8 and 9, 11 and 12, and 14 and 15. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 valley folds on this paper piece. And as of right now, two mountain folds on the sides. By the way, let's reinforce those mountain folds. You can see that I have marks on the edges of this cardstock piece. And to create them, I will take my previous template. It was 6 5/8 inch long. Now I will trim it and I will make it into a new length of the template that will correspond the length of this piece. Let me trim it. Here it is. Now it's of the same height, let's say, or width. Again, depends on how you look at it. And I will refold it. We'll make sure that the corners meet nicely. I'll use my bone folder to create a distinct fold line there. And I will use this time a red pencil. You can keep on using the plain pencil. I'm just creating a red line so that you can see that that's my new template with a new measurement. On the side of the cardstock where we don't have any marks, any measurements, I'm going to line the template up along the edge and make a tick mark on the cardstock right next to the line on the template. I will do the same on the opposite edge. And here are my center points that I'm going to use for lining up the binding on top of the cover and adhering them together. Our next step will be to apply the glue to each one of the marked sections, one at a time, and glue them down with the neighboring section. So 2 will be glued down to 3. Let me add the glue only to the section number 2, like this, and then fold the paper and burnish on top so that the sections 2 and 3 glue down together. Now I can fold my paper out and reveal only the section 1 and 4. Next, I will add the glue to the section number 5 and fold it on top of the section number 6. Use my bone folder to burnish and press on top. Wait a few seconds to make sure that the glue is dry, and then unfold the paper and burnish again. And you will see that only the sections 1, 4, and then 7, and so on are visible. Now we have to add the glue to the section number 8 and glue it down to 9. Now when I glue the sections down, I still look at the edges of the paper at the top and at the bottom, and especially I look at them when I fold the cardstock back. Make sure that the edges are still even. This is what we have so far. We have 3 hinges ready, and we will work on them a little bit later more to make sure that they are folded the way we want. Now let's apply the glue to the section number 11 and glue it to the section number 12. Unfold the paper. Look at the edges at the top and at the bottom. Burnish on top. That's what we have. Now let's adhere the last pair, 14 and 15. Unfold, burnish, and now only 6 sections are visible: 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, and 16. Flip the paper piece to this side and fold each one of the paper hinges to the opposite side from how it's currently folded. Teach your hinges to be upright. This is our binding. I'm going to ink it along the top and the bottom edges between each one of the hinges, like so. This is how it will look like. So once again, I remind you that the height of the binding is the same as the height of your assembled page. Next, I will take my scissors with the sharp tips and I want to trim the corners of each one of the hinges up to the score lines. Try not to cut from the paper which is between the hinges. This will ensure that we can easily mount our pocket pages on top of the hinges. I will set this piece aside to fully dry for now, and I will work next with the scrap pieces of that colorful fabric that I prepared. You can use pieces of lace. I'm going to take some twine, roughly 3 inches long will be enough for me to work with, and I will also need the pieces of fabric to be around 3 inches long, and they are about 1.5 or 1.25 inch wide. I will not trim this one. So first of all, I will fold the fabric pieces in half along the long side, and then right into that fold I will add the glue and put the twine on top of the glue right into the fold. Add some more glue on both sides of the twine. Fold the fabric again and use my bone folder for pressing on top and making sure that I adhere 2 layers of fabric together, and I sandwich that twine piece in between. This is how it will look like. Let's do the same with the second piece. Now we have to trim this to the correct width. I trim on one edge first, and then I use a ruler to measure. So my headband needs to be 2 3/8. Here it is, so I can cut right here. Now when I cut, I usually like to add some glue right on top of the edges of the twine, which is between the fabric. And excuse my fingers, they are all covered in glue. Now let's measure and cut the second piece. Let's add the glue. And we can, as a matter of fact, adhere the fabric all the way. It will be even easier to work with it if we do that. Okay, so let's use the previously prepared piece as our guide and trim the second fabric piece according to the first one. I will also glue these pieces together. And now that our headbands are ready, we're going to glue them down along the edges of our binding right at the top and also at the bottom, making sure that the edges of the headband match with the score lines on the sides. Let's apply the glue, and then I'm gluing the fabric down to the paper, making sure that the twine, which is now rolled and covered between the fabric, extends beyond the edge of the paper. Press with your fingers. Do the same with the headband for the opposite side. When you press with your bone folder, make sure that you don't move the fabric piece underneath and that it stays in the same place where it should be. Let's trim the corners of the flaps on the binding the same way as we did on the outer spine and the cover. The middle area of the binding, the one between the folds, is 2 3/8 inch wide. And then, if you remember, the height of our binding is 6 3/8. In my case, in your case, it can be different. You are going to prepare a piece of cardstock that will be 1/8 of an inch narrower than the width of your binding, but it will be of the same height as the binding. These are my measurements. I scored this piece at every 1/8 of an inch. Since it's curving to this side, I am going to glue it down like that to the binding and cover the fabric pieces and also reinforce this whole area here. I'm going to use my tacky glue for that. I'm not going to apply the glue all the way to the edges of the fabric, but I am going to apply it very close to the edges of the cardstock. Once again, I remind you that it curves this way. I'm going to cover with this paper piece the element of the binding, and I just want to make sure that I center it between the side folds. Now it's the time to use the bone folder and burnish on top really good, wiping off the excess of the glue. If you, like me, have any, and this is how it looks. Let's refold the hinges. This is our binding. It will be attached inside the cover like so. Now you remember that the width of our flaps on the binding is 1 1/4. I want us to get back to the cover and create lines with a pencil right inside the folds between the covers and the spine. So I'm drawing a line right inside that fold. It will not be very precise, but still, just don't draw the line all the way to the very top and bottom. From these lines, we are going to measure 1 1/4 inch. And I always measure in 2 places and then connect both of the marks. This is my guideline that will be used later when I glue the binding into the cover. We can even create it in another color so that we don't mix it up with anything else. Mine will be red so that you can also see them better on camera. Here we go. Now let's get back to the binding. and our pages. I want you to take all of the cards out of the pocket pages and also take out all of the booklets. We are now going to attach our pages to the binding. I like to do that very slowly. First of all, you remember that we snipped the corners on the hinges. Take one of the pages and just put it on top of the hinge, sandwiching the hinge between the parts of the page, like so. It should fit nicely. If not, you can gently and very carefully use your scissors with very sharp and pointy tips and trim a bit more from that hinge. I will work with the first hinge right now and the first page. I will fold all the hinges like so. I will flatten them and I will start to apply the wet glue onto the hinge, trying not to go beyond that fold line, even staying a little bit away from it. And then without folding that hinge all the way, I will add the glue to the reverse side of the hinge in the same way, trying to stay a little bit away from the fold line. And you don't need a lot of glue. Now I will take my page number 1. I will put my hand into the pocket and I will slide that page right on top of the hinge, making sure that it sits nicely on top of it and reaches all the way to the binding there at the bottom. I will press with my fingers a bit and make sure that I really catch that hinge with the page. And then I can use my bone folder and gently burnish on top. Now my page number 1 is attached to the binding. If it's the first time that you do this with me, please don't rush. Check yourself twice, 3 times before you add the glue, before you glue the page on top of the hinge. Check the direction of the page, that you really are gluing it the right way, since the construction of the pages is so that the cards and tags slide into it from various sides. It can just be challenging to take the card or tag out if you don't glue the page down to the hinge the right way. So if you need, stop the video, look at the direction in which I have the page, and do the same. Check yourself a few times before you glue anything down. Now I will take my page number 2 like this. I will eventually slide my hand through the page from this side and mount it on top of the second hinge and glue it down like so. But first, let's add the glue to the second hinge. Now that I have the glue applied to the hinge, I will mount the second page on top of the hinge number 2. Once again, just make sure that it reaches all the way to the bottom of that hinge. Press a bit with your fingers and then unfold and use your bone folder. Burnish everything down and adhere the page to the hinge. Next comes the page number 3 with the pocket, and if we have anything inside that pocket, I think it will be better to take it out. Let's add the glue to the hinge number 3 and mount our page on top. Next comes the page number 4. and it will be mounted on top of the hinge like so. And then the last page is page number 5. Let's unload it. It will be mounted on top of the hinge number 5 like this. All of our 5 pages are attached now to the binding, and we can adhere the binding with the pages to our cover. Before you do that, check that the cover is in the right direction and the pages are in the right direction, that you don't flip them by chance, that everything is facing the correct way. We are going to apply the glue only to the side flaps of the binding and adhere the flaps to the cover using the vertical guidelines that we have created before in red color in my case, and matching the horizontal marks on the flaps with the horizontal lines on the cover. And it doesn't matter if you start with the back cover and the back flap or the front cover and the front flap. Just make sure that you line everything up. I'm holding the whole stack of pages and the binding with my hand as I glue the flap down. So on this side, it is ready. Now I will flip it to this side and put something under the pages, maybe even this tin. With the brads, apply the glue to the second flap, and now line the edge of the flap with the vertical red guideline and the horizontal mark with the horizontal line on the cover. You might need to hold both the pages and the cover together and lift them a little bit while the glue is drying and while you burnish on top of the flap with your bone folder. Once you're sure that everything is glued down, you can let it go. That will be all from me for today. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments, and I will talk to you soon in the next part of our video tutorials. Bye!